The Rolex came to me on a Tuesday. Not through the front door of my shop. That entrance is for customers who want to browse, to pretend they might buy something, to feel the weight of history in their palms before they set it down and walk away. This watch arrived through the service entrance, carried by a man whose hands shook as he held the box. "I found it," he said, "in my father's things after the funeral." I didn't ask which war. The watch told me. The 1947 Oyster Perpetual, reference 5030, was issued to officers in the final months of the Pacific Theater. The dial had faded from black to something like gunmetal. The crystal bore a scar near the 2 o'clock position, not a crack, but a chip, as if it had stopped something small and fast. I opened the case back with tools I've owned longer than most people keep their homes. Inside, the movement, the perpetual rotor, the escapement, the balance wheel. 77 years of ticking, stopping, ticking again. Someone had tried to repair it once, in the 1970s, judging by the screwdriver marks. They'd made it worse. The oil had congealed into something like tar. A mainspring screw was stripped. "Can you fix it?" the man asked. I didn't answer immediately. I was listening. Holding the movement to my ear, I could hear what was wrong, the slight catch in the gear train, the uneven pulse of the escapement. It spoke to me in a language I've spent 50 years learning. "Yes," I said finally, "but it will take time." He left it with me. That was March. It is now September, and I am still working on it. Not because I couldn't finish sooner, because some things shouldn't be rushed. Because every watch I've ever restored has taught me something, and this one, the survivor, has the most to say. My name is Frank Mitchell. I am 67 years old. I have been a watchmaker for 43 years, the last 31 of them at my own shop on East 47th Street, in the Diamond District of Manhattan. I have restored timepieces for Paul Newman, for a Saudi prince, for the chairman of the Federal Reserve. But I have never, in all those years, felt the pressure I feel now. Not from the watch, from what comes after. I open the shop at 7 each morning. Not because customers arrive that early, the Diamond District doesn't truly wake until 10, but because the first 3 hours are mine. Quiet hours. The hours when I can hear a movement, think. My bench is in the back room behind a door that says authorized personnel only, in a sign my wife Helen put up 30 years ago as a joke. The bench is oak, scarred with decades of slipped screwdrivers and solder drops. Above it, a window looks out onto an air shaft where pigeons nest. I have named 3 of them after master watchmakers. They don't seem to mind. This morning, as every morning, I make coffee in the small kitchenette Helen installed when she still worked here. Colombian roast, 2 sugars, the way I've taken it since Vietnam. I don't think about Vietnam often, but the coffee reminds me. Some habits survive because they anchor you to who you were when you needed anchoring most. Helen doesn't come to the shop anymore. Her Parkinson's, diagnosed 18 months ago, makes the subway stairs impossible. She stays in our apartment on West 72nd, the rent-controlled 2-bedroom we've lived in since 1987, when this city was different, and we were young enough to believe it would stay that way. I go home at 6, make her dinner, help her through the evening routine. The tremors are worse now. The medication helps, but not enough. Not for what comes next. Our grandson Thomas is why I still work, why I will work until I cannot hold a loop steady. Thomas is 18, brilliant, accepted early decision to Princeton. The financial aid package covers tuition. It does not cover the other costs, the travel, the books, the summer programs that will determine whether he gets into the graduate school, that will determine whether he becomes the architect he dreams of being. Helen and I have calculated. We have $47,000 in savings. Thomas needs $62,000 over 4 years. The difference must come from my hands, from this shop, from the work I do in the quiet hours. I was pricing the 1947 Rolex restoration when the bell above the front door rang. It was 9:47 a.m. I wasn't expecting anyone. The man who entered wore a suit that cost more than my monthly rent. He looked around my shop the way a general surveys a battlefield he has already decided to burn. "Frank Mitchell?" he asked. "Yes, Carter Blake." He extended a hand. I didn't take it immediately. I had tweezers in my fingers, oil on my palm. "Bryant Street Capital. We acquired this building last month. I'm here to discuss the future of your lease. Bryant Street Capital." I had seen the notices posted in the lobby, the new management company's logo where the old landlord's name had been. Private equity. I knew what that meant in 2024. It meant numbers where people had been. It meant optimization and synergies and, eventually, eviction notices dressed in polite language. "I have 11 years left on my lease," I said. Carter Blake smiled. He was 34 years old. I knew this because he told me later, when he was trying to establish rapport. "I started my first company at 22, sold it at 26, Harvard Business School. You know how it is." I did not know how it was. I had been in Vietnam at 22, learning to repair radio equipment in a Quonset hut while mortars fell somewhere beyond the perimeter. I had not started a company. I had started a life with Helen, with patience, with a belief that skill mattered more than speed. "Your lease is secure," Blake said now. "We're not here to displace tenants, we're here to elevate the district. To create a luxury experience that matches the products being sold." He walked to my display case, looked at the watches inside, not at the watches themselves, but at the price tags. "These are peer-owned, restored by me, each one. And a restoration process? How long does it take?" "Depends on the piece. 3 months, sometimes a year." He turned to face me. The smile had not reached his eyes. "A year, for one watch. For one watch that will run for 50 years after I'm gone." 50 years. He said it as if I had suggested the watch would fly. "Mr. Mitchell, I'm going to be direct with you. Bryant Street is investing $40 million in this district. We're bringing in verified luxury brands, digital authentication, AI-powered provenance tracking. The future of high-end retail is seamless. It's frictionless. It's fast," I said. "Efficient, yes." I set down my tweezers, wiped my hands on the cloth I keep for this purpose. "Mr. Blake, do you know what that watch is?" I pointed to the 1947 Rolex, still disassembled on my bench in the back room. It survived the Pacific Theater. It survived a botched repair in 1974. It survived being stored in a drawer for 30 years, unwound, unloved. It survived because it was built to survive, because the man who made it understood that some things must be built to outlast their maker. "That's a lovely story," Blake said, "but stories don't scale. We're offering you a partnership. Your expertise, your brand under our infrastructure, digital first, AI-assisted restoration. We could process 10 times the volume at premium pricing with your name attached." "My name," I repeated. "Frank Mitchell, Master Watchmaker, certified by Bryant Street Capital. We handle the marketing, the authentication, the customer experience. You handle, well, whatever it is you actually do." I looked at him for a long moment. At his suit, at his smile, at the complete absence of curiosity in his eyes about what lay on my bench, about what 77 years of ticking sounded like when you held it to your ear. "No," I said. That was March. By June, the district had changed. Bryant Street's elevation arrived in phases. First, the digital kiosks in the lobby's sleek white pillars, where customers could explore inventory on touchscreens. Then, the authentication center 2 doors down, where AI cameras scanned watches and assigned provenance scores based on blockchain records. The young man who ran it had never opened a watch case in his life. He wore a lanyard that said Certified Luxury Specialist. My customers began to change, fewer collectors, more speculators. People who asked about appreciation potential before they asked about the movement. Who wanted their purchase verified by the AI, not by my hands. Who looked at the 1947 Rolex on my bench and said, "But what's the provenance score?" I explained patiently that the provenance was in the metal, in the patina, in the fact that it had survived when its owner had not. They nodded and left. They bought from the shop 3 doors down, where Bryant Street had installed a master restorer, a 30-year-old with a loupe he didn't know how to focus, who sent every watch out to a factory in Switzerland and called it Gisp. My revenue fell 40% by August. I stopped taking salary. Helen's medication increased. Thomas called to say he'd been offered a summer research position in Rome, full funding except for travel. I said yes before I knew how I would pay for it. I would find a way. I always had. Then on the last Thursday of August, Carter Blake returned. He didn't knock. He walked through the back room door, the one with Helen's joke sign, and stood over my bench. Looked at the 1947 Rolex, now nearly complete, the new mainspring, the restored balance, the crystal I had polished by hand until the chip was barely visible, a scar that told the story. "Impressive," he said, "for what it is." "What do you want, Mr. Blake?" "We're restructuring the tenant mix, optimizing for the luxury experience I described in March." He reached into his jacket, produced an envelope. Your lease is being terminated. We require possession by October 1st. That's 30 days. I didn't take the envelope. I have 11 years. You had a clause. Section 14.3. Termination for brand misalignment. Our AI analysis shows your customer satisfaction scores authentic satisfaction, not just transaction volume or in the bottom quartile of district tenants. You're a drag on the ecosystem, Mr. Mitchell. I'm sorry. He wasn't sorry. I could see that. He was excited. This was what he did: entered places where people had built things over decades, measured their value against metrics they had never agreed to, and removed them when the numbers turned. What about my customers? I asked. The watches in progress? You'll have access to the premises for transition. Document your processes. Train your replacement if you can find one willing to work in a traditional environment. He looked at my bench, my tools, my pigeons. We have a relocation package, a shop in Queens. Smaller, of course, more appropriate for your demographic. My demographic. Older clientele, slower pace. He smiled. You understand? I understood. I understood that he had never held a watch to his ear and heard it speak, that he had never stayed awake until 3 a.m, worrying about a balance spring, because someone's grandfather had trusted him with their only heirloom, that he had never made a promise to a wife, to a grandson, to a craft, and meant it with every fiber of his being. I took the envelope. 30 days, I said. 30 days. He left. I stood in my shop, the shop I had built with Helen when we were young, and believed that skill mattered, and I listened to the 1947 Rolex ticking on my bench. It was the only sound in the world that made sense. I didn't tell Helen that night. I made her dinner salmon, which she still enjoys when the tremors allow her to hold a fork. I helped her through the evening routine. I sat with her while we watched the news, some crisis somewhere, some number too large to comprehend. When she slept, I went to the window and looked at the city. 43 years. The bench I had built myself from oak isolacic at a lumberyard in Brooklyn that no longer existed. The tools I had inherited from my master, a Swiss immigrant named Henri Blanc, who had taught me that watchmaking was not repair but dialogue, a conversation across time with the person who had made the watch and the person who would receive it. The pigeons I had named, the customers who had become friends, who had died, whose grandchildren now brought me their watches. And Thomas Princeton, Rome, the future I had promised him. I packed my personal items on the final Saturday. The shop would remain open for transition, Bryant Street's word, but I would not be there. I would not watch my life's work converted into content for their digital kiosks. The box was small, cardboard from the recycling pile. Side of my first loop, given by Henri Blanc in 1978, with his initials scratched into the brass. A photograph. Helen and I, 1987, the day we signed the lease. She is laughing at something I said. I am looking at her as if she is the only thing in the world. The service record for Paul Newman's Daytona. He had signed it to Frank, who keeps time honest. My coffee mug. Colombian roast, 2 sugars, 43 years of mornings. I did not pack the 1947 Rolex. It was not mine. It belonged to the man whose father had carried it through the Pacific, who had trusted me to finish what time it started. I would finish it. I would find a way. I took the subway home. For the first time in 43 years, I did not know where I would work on Monday. I told Helen on Sunday. She was having a good day. The tremors mild, her mind clear. She listened without interrupting, which is her way. When I finished, she reached for my hand. We'll use the savings, she said. That's for you, for Thomas. Thomas will understand. He's in Rome. He's finally happy. I'm not taking that from him. Then what? I didn't have an answer. I spent Monday in the apartment pacing, listening to the traffic on West 72nd Street. The sound was wrong. No ticking, no pigeons, no Henri Blanc in my ear, telling me to listen to what the movement is saying. On Tuesday I received 3 calls. The first was from a collector in Greenwich, Connecticut, whose Patek Philippe annual calendar I had restored in 2019. He had heard something about my situation. Was I available for private work? I said I would consider it. The second was from a lawyer. Bryant Street Capital was being sued by 3 former tenants. Would I join the class action? I said no. Lawsuits take years. Thomas needs Rome now. Helen needs medication now. I need to work now. The third was from a man whose name I didn't recognize. A voice like gravel, like someone who had spent decades speaking over engine noise. Frank Mitchell? This is Jack Pryor. I run Pryor Aviation out at Teterboro. We met once 1989, you fixed my father's Breitling, I never forgot. I remembered. The Breitling Navitimer 1962, owned by a man who had flown B-17s. Jack had brought it to me with a cracked crystal and a story about his father's final flight. I heard what happened, Jack said. Those bastards. Look, I don't know watches, but I know people who do good work. I have a hangar out here, empty half the time. You need space, you got it. No rent. Just keep doing what you do. I didn't answer immediately. I was listening to something I hadn't heard in 5 days. Possibility. Mr. Pryor. Jack. Jack, I have equipment, tools, a bench that weighs. Bring it. All of it. I'll send a truck. I would have gone to Teterboro on Wednesday. I would have started again, in a hangar smelling of jet fuel, with the roar of Gulf Streams taking off overhead. I would have finished the 1947 Rolex and delivered it to the son of the veteran and taken the next piece, and the next. But I didn't. Because on Tuesday night, while I was packing my tools, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. Then again. And again. The 4th time I answered. Frank, it's David Chen, from the district. Bryant Street's Authentication Center. David had run the shop next to mine for 20 years. We were not friends. He sold new watches, I restored old ones. Our customers were different species, but we were colleagues. We had survived the same recessions, the same street closures, the same rise of smart watches that were supposed to make us obsolete. Frank, you need to turn on the news. I did, and I saw what Carter Blake's AI-powered authentication had done. The system deployed across Bryant Street's elevated district in August had a flaw. A machine learning model trained on photographs of watches, assigning provenance scores based on visual similarity to authenticated pieces. The problem, which 3 independent watchmakers had warned about in beta testing, was that the AI could not distinguish between a genuine vintage watch and a sophisticated fake. It could not see inside the case. It could not feel the weight of the movement. It could not know the history that lived in metal. In 72 hours, the AI had authenticated $2.3 million worth of counterfeit timepieces. Customer speculators, mostly, the kind who bought for appreciation potential, had purchased watches that were worthless. A Patek Philippe 1518, supposedly one of 12 surviving examples, sold for $890,000. It was a replica, made in a workshop in Shenzhen, good enough to fool a camera but not a human hand. The lawsuits were already filed. The district was in chaos. And Carter Blake, according to David, had been unavailable for comment for 18 hours. I turned off the television. I looked at my tools packed in boxes. I looked at the 1947 Rolex, finished now, waiting in its case. My phone rang again. This time the number was familiar. Bryant Street, Capital's main line. I didn't answer. I went to bed. For the first time in 43 years I slept without setting an alarm. They found me on Wednesday afternoon. I was at the kitchen table, drinking coffee, reading a book about the history of chronometers that I had owned for 30 years and never had time to open. Carter Blake had aged 5 years and 5 days. His suit was the same, perhaps literally the same suit, but it hung on him differently. His eyes were red. His hands, which had never held a watch worth restoring, shook as they held a folder. Frank, he said, I need you to come back. I didn't invite him in. We stood in the doorway of my apartment building, Helen visible in the background, watching from her chair. I had told her who he was. She had not looked away from him since he arrived. You terminated my lease, I said. That was a mistake, a procedural error. We're prepared to reinstate you immediately. Full restoration of your previous space, a 5-year extension, and, he opened the folder, a consulting arrangement, $400,000 annually, plus percentage of authentication fees. Our system needs human oversight. Your expertise, your eye. He tried to smile. You were right, Frank, about the AI, about what it couldn't see. We need someone who understands the craft. I looked at him, at the desperation in his posture, at the complete absence of comprehension about what he had destroyed, not just for me, but for the district, for the customers who had trusted his seamless experience, for the young man in the authentication center who had believed his lanyard meant something. You don't need me, I said. Frank, please. The lawsuits, the regulatory investigation. We need someone credible to certify that our processes are now sound, your name, your reputation. You need someone to blame when the AI fails again. Someone credible to stand in front of the cameras and say, I approve this. He didn't deny it. That was the only honest thing he did that day. No, I said. Frank, I spent 43 years learning to hear what a watch is saying. You spent 5 minutes learning to read a spreadsheet. The watches will survive you. I will survive you. But I will not be your shield. I closed the door. I didn't watch him leave. I went back to my coffee, to my book, to the sound of Helen's breathing in the next room. Jack Pryor's truck arrived on Thursday. 2 men who treated my tools with the respect of people who understood that precision matters. They loaded the bench, the oak bench, scarred and perfect, and the boxes, and the 1947 Rolex in its case. Teterboro was 23 miles from Manhattan. It might as well have been another country. The hangar smelled of aviation fuel and machine oil, and the particular silence of spaces built for machines that carry people into the sky. Jack met me at the door. 70 years old, bent from decades of crawling through aircraft, with hands that knew torque specifications the way mine knew escapements. Back corner, he said. Window faces east. Good light in the morning. There's a coffee maker. Colombian, I think. Is that right? It is. Good. He looked at my bench being unloaded. My father said you saved his watch. Said you saved his memory of the war somehow. I didn't understand then. I think I do now. I set up my bench that afternoon. The pigeons were gone, replaced by the scream of jet engines, but the light was good, and the silence between flights was deep enough to hear a movement think. I finished the 1947 Rolex on Friday, polished the case until the Pacific Scar was a whisper, regulated the movement until it gained 2 seconds per day, perfect for a watch that had survived imperfection. I called the son of the veteran and told him it was ready. He cried when he saw it. I didn't. I had work to do. Word travels in ways that don't require AI. A collector in Greenwich told a dealer in Geneva told a historian in London. Frank Mitchell is working again, out of an aviation hangar in New Jersey. Still the best, still slow. By October I had a waiting list. By November, I had hired an assistant, a young woman named Sarah Chen, no relation to Carter, who had quit Bryant Street's authentication center in disgust and wanted to learn what watches actually were. By December, I had repaid Helen's savings and funded Thomas's spring semester in Rome. The news from Manhattan reached me in fragments. Bryant Street Capital had parted ways with Carter Blake Industry Code for firing, with enough severance to buy silence. The district had lost 3 major tenants. The AI Authentication Center was closed, replaced by a traditional dealer who advertised human expertise as if it were a novelty. The lawsuits continued. The $2.3 million was never recovered. Some of the counterfeit watches were destroyed. Others, too good to waste, were sold again to new speculators who believed they were buying history. I didn't celebrate. I worked. I taught Sarah to listen to movements. I restored a Vacheron Constantin that had survived the Russian Revolution, a Jaeger-LeCoultre that had been underwater for 6 months, a pocket watch made in 1897 that still kept perfect time because someone once had built it to outlast their own death. Thomas came home for Christmas. He had grown in Rome taller somehow, though he was fully grown. He sat in my hangar, at my bench, and watched me work on a Breguet tourbillon that had taken me 3 months to source parts for. Dad told me what happened, he said, with the shop, with that man. I know. Are you angry? I set down my loupe, looked at my grandson, the future I had promised delivered. I was, for a while. Then I realized something. What? Carter Blake will find another job, another company to optimize. He will make the same mistakes because he cannot hear what he is not listening for. But I will still be here, in this hangar or somewhere else, because what I do cannot be optimized. It can only be learned, slowly, over decades, by people who care more about the work than about the result. Thomas was quiet for a moment. Then, can you teach me? Not to do it, just to understand it. I smiled. The first true smile since March. Yes, I said, I can teach you that. It is March again. 1 year since the Rolex arrived. 1 year since Carter Blake walked into my shop and began the end of what I thought was my life. I am still in the hangar. I will stay here, or I will move somewhere else. It doesn't matter. What matters is the bench, The tools, the hands that know what machines never will. The 1947 Rolex came back last month. The son of the veteran, his name is Robert, I finally learned, brought it to me himself. He wanted me to see it on his wrist. He wanted to tell me that his daughter, my age when I started, wants to learn about watches. He wanted to ask if I would teach her. I said yes, of course yes. This morning I opened the shop. My shop, whatever it holds, at 7 a.m. I made coffee, Colombian roast, 2 sugars. I sat at my bench and listened to the watches. The Breguet Tourbillon, finished now, waiting for its owner. The Vacheron Constantin, ticking through its 2nd century. The pocket watch from 1897, still perfect, still patient. And a new piece, a Rolex Oyster Perpetual, reference 5030, manufactured in 1947. It sits on my bench, disassembled, waiting. Not for me to repair it, I finished that work a year ago. Waiting for me to teach Sarah how to listen, how to hear what survives, how to understand that some things are built to outlast their makers, and that the making is the point. Helen is having a good month. The new medication helps. Thomas is applying to graduate school's MIT, his dream. He will get in. I know this the way I know a watch will run, by listening, patiently, to what it tells me. Carter Blake, I am told, is working in venture capital now. Disrupting some other industry, some other craft, some other life built slowly over decades. I do not wish him ill. I do not think of him at all, except when someone asks, and even then, only as a reminder. The reminder is this: there are 2 kinds of time. The kind that passes, that takes everything with it, that makes us old and afraid and desperate to optimize what cannot be rushed, and the kind that we make with our hands, with our patience, with our refusal to let the world convince us that faster is better. I make the 2nd kind. I have made it for 43 years. I will make it until I cannot hold a loop steady, and then I will teach someone else to make it, and they will teach someone else, and the watches will continue, ticking through our brief lives, speaking to whoever listens. That is the legacy. Not the shop on 47th Street, not the hangar in Teterboro, not even the name Frank Mitchell, which will be forgotten soon enough. The legacy is the work, done right, done slow, done with hands that know what machines never will. The 1947 Rolex ticks on my bench. I put my ear to it, and I listen. It is telling me the time. It is telling me I still have time. I get back to work.